All these years later, Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven is still considered to be one of the most beautiful films ever made, which is a testament to the meticulous craftsmanship of both Malick and his cinematographer, Nestor Almendros. And one of the craziest things is, Almendros was going blind during the production of this shoot. He would have his assistant take Polaroids of the frame and then view them under a high-powered magnifying glass. Crazy. The partnership was characterized by a shared vision, but it was Malick's meticulous approach that dictated the look and feel of this film and its very distinctive visual style. Malick's approach to filmmaking has always been rooted in his love for natural beauty, which can be seen in all of his films as he often insists on using natural light as much as possible. This method, while challenging, was key to achieving the film's almost ethereal look and quality. The collaboration between Malick and Almendros was less about negotiation and more about a shared understanding of this visual philosophy. Of course, Almendros was not just executing Malick's instruction, he was a partner in creating these images. And this film is a great example of what can happen when a director and a cinematographer have synergy and have the same visual goals for the outcome of the film. Almendros had previously worked on films that had a more natural film and aesthetic, which was perfect for Malick's vision. In fact, it was his work with Francois Truffaut that inspired Malick to work with him in the first place. Malick's rules for shooting Days of Heaven were akin to that of a manifesto: use natural light, prioritize authenticity over artificiality, and evoke the feeling of American paintings from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Almendros embraced these guidelines, bringing what he had to the table, and together they pushed the boundaries of conventional cinematography. Malick had a detailed knowledge of still photography and painting, which informed these guidelines, drawing inspiration from American painters like Andrew Wyeth and Edward Hopper. Such a meticulous attention to visual detail is what sets it apart from other films and makes it not just a movie experience, but a visual experience. Almendros, who admired Terrence Malick's previous film Badlands, was eager to work with him and accepted this approach without any pushback at all. His previous experiences, particularly films like L'Enfant Sauvage, where natural light played a critical role, aligned perfectly with Malick's vision. The result was a seamless collaboration where the lines between director and cinematographer were blurred, creating a unified visual style that was somehow both groundbreaking and timeless. Now, Malick's meticulousness is a hallmark of all of his films, but it was particularly pronounced in Days of Heaven. The decision to shoot during magic hour was one of the film's most discussed techniques. For those of you who don't know, magic hour is that time right after the sun sets beyond the horizon. There's still a little bit of light and you can still see, and it's beautiful. Everything's even and gorgeous. Logistically, this is a terrible decision to make, and probably had the producers pulling out their hair. But it was non-negotiable for Malick because it added to the film's dreamlike quality. Almendros fully committed to this vision, working tirelessly to capture these moments of fleeting light, demonstrating the director's influence over every aspect of the film's visual construction. In the article Photographing Days of Heaven, Almendros recounts the challenges and rewards of working under Malick's direction. Almendros notes that Terrence Malick was adamant about shooting only during magic hour. He said it was difficult because the light was so fleeting, but gave the film its unique look. He goes on to say sometimes we would set up a scene, rehearse it, and then wait hours until the light was just right, but Terry believed in the importance of capturing these moments authentically. The term magic hour is actually misleading. The actual time in which this light is available is probably close to 20 to 35 minutes depending on the time of the year. But this decision wasn't just an aesthetic decision, it was actually time period accurate, which Malick knew. For field workers during this period, they would wake up before the sun rose and they would end work as the sun was setting. So to shoot these scenes accurately, you had to shoot it during the magic hour, right before the sun set, right after the sun sets, and right before it rises. It was nearly impossible to have Hollywood technicians understand that they would only shoot for 20 minutes a day. But it was Malick's bravery and knowledge of the cinematic form that pushed this forward and allowed them to do it. To make this fleeting time go as smoothly as possible, they would rehearse with the cameras and the actors during the day. And then as soon as the sun would set, they would frantically shoot, being careful not to waste even a single minute. There were multiple times where they were unable to finish the scenes and they would have to continue to shoot them the next day, which set their schedule back. The magic hour scenes were always pushed one stop to 200 ASA or 200 ISO, which is Basically the same thing. As they would lose light, they would open the aperture wider and wider until they had to get on their fastest lens, which was a 55mm, which had a maximum aperture of t1.1. And even when that wasn't enough light, they would reduce the shutter speed and shoot at 12 or even 8 frames per second, being sure to tell the actors they would have to move extra slow. Shooting like this changed the way that the colors looked on the negative, and that would especially happen the deeper into Magic Hour they went. Alejandros admits in a lot of ways the look of this film was saved by the color timer that they used. A color timer is pretty much the equivalent of a colorist, except they had way less tools, only printer lights, so they could manipulate the reds, the greens, and the blues to try to balance everything out. Now, one of the apparent issues is shooting wide open like that at a T1.1 is the super shallow depth of field, which means you really don't have much room to move without going out of focus. But Malick, understanding the technical aspects of cinematography, was ready for this. Malick was smart. He designed the shots so that the actors were on the same focal plane in these situations so that they wouldn't have to worry about going in or out of focus. Back then, a lot of times the communication between the director and the cinematographer was difficult because directors didn't fully understand the technical side of cinematography. Whereas today, directors come up knowing how to do the technical stuff because a lot of them have to do it on their own. But that's not Terrence Malick. He knew the technical aspects of cinematography, which made communication even easier. Alejandro says he always understood exactly my cinematographic preferences and explanations. And not only did he allow me to do what I had always wanted to do, which was to use less artificial light in a period movie than is conventionally used. Many times I use none at all, but to actually push me in that direction. And this went beyond just the normal use of natural light. For instance, when shooting outside and using natural light, a lot of times it would be normal to use a reflector to bounce some of the light from the sun into the shadowy areas. However, for this film, they decided to not do that and instead expose for the shadows rather than filling them in. The effect was the sky would become overexposed or burned and it would lose its blue hue. This was something that Terrence Malick liked because he never liked the way the blue skies looked in movies. He felt that it looked too much like a postcard. So what they would do is always backlight the characters with the sun. And rather than having the sky completely blown out or the shadows completely dark, they would meter to be in between the two so that the sky would be a little bit overexposed and the faces would be a little bit underexposed. This eliminated the color in the sky, but wouldn't make the sky completely blow out, and still kept enough detail in the shadows to be able to see the faces. And the results are beautiful. But these natural light decisions became a point of contention with the crew. With very few exceptions, the crew was made up of the typical old Hollywood guard. The people on this crew were used to using more artificial light in the style of old Hollywood. You don't let the shadows get overly underexposed, especially not on the subject's faces. Alejandro and Malick found themselves deluminating and in some cases completely taking away the lights that the crew had set up because they felt too artificial. So what they would do is film a scene and then have the crew watch the dailies to understand what they were going for. Although that won some of the crew over, a lot of the crew were still grumbling during the entirety of the shoot. One of the hardest things to do in life is accept something different or new. And this is just not something that they were accustomed to doing. They felt that there was a certain way that you lit a film and they wanted to continue in the way that they had been doing for years. Besides the crew, the actual artistic collaborators were clicking in every sense of the word. Alejandro has said that there are typically only a small handful of people that are actually responsible for crafting the film. And I tend to agree. In this instance, he says there are about 6. Individuals like production designer Jack Fisk, who might be the greatest production designer of all time. Patricia Norris, the costume designer. Jacob Brackman, who was an associate of Malick's and was in charge of the second unit. And producers Harold and Bert Schneider. That close-knit group pushed this vision forward and were able to create something magical. Each day, this group of collaborators would ride together to set in a van along with Malick and Alejandros, and it would be like they would have their own little production meeting before they got there, which got them focused on what they were doing so that they were all on the same page. It became one giant brain working towards the same aesthetic goals based on what the director wanted. Between the set decorator, props, and wardrobe, they selected combinations of colors that were muted because historically colors wouldn't have been as bright and aggressive as they are today. Patricia Norris created clothing that didn't have a synthetic look or quality that would be recognized that is so apparent in the finely machined clothing of today. Jack Fisk actually built a mansion in the middle of the rolling wheat fields. It was a real house both inside and outside, not just a facade like how it's normally done in a movie and then everything else is shot on a set. This attention to detail and authenticity is what Malick demanded on set, which created this mood and atmosphere beyond just what the camera and light was doing. For the night scenes, they would always push their 100 speed film to 1 or 2 stops, to ASA 200 or even 400. This was only possible because of more modern film stocks at the time. The grain wasn't as noticeable as it would have been even a couple of years before, which allowed them to push it to get more light. And at the time, having that much light at night was revolutionary. Professional filmmaking doesn't often allow for underexposure and bad focus, but Malick wanted a certain style which risked those things happening. The AC and the cinematographer both worked together tirelessly to make sure that aesthetically Malick had what he wanted, but it also maintained focus and the exposure that was needed. Malick is so visually dominant that you have to have a cinematographer that's on the same page as you and that's actually willing to collaborate in the way that works best for the director. Terrence Malick had such strong opinions on light and was hands-on with composition and camera movement. A lot of cinematographers don't flourish in this type of environment, but Alejandro's did, elevating all of it beyond what even Malick could envision. But Terrence Malick wasn't just hands-on with the camera and the light, he was hands-on with all of the visuals, including the set design, including the costume design. These things were living in his head for so long, and he crafted something that could only be created by him. He had such a strong vision for this film and fortunately found collaborators that shared the same vision and shared the same visual and aesthetic preferences. It's because these collaborators got together that they created something so special that has been studied and admired for so many decades after it was created. And most importantly, beyond its aesthetic beauty, it matches the story that's being told. Beauty for beauty's sake is pointless, but when it matches the story in the film, it elevates it beyond. That's the reason why Days of Heaven has lasted so long. That's the reason why we're talking about it today. And if you haven't seen this film, you should check it out because it's gorgeous and fantastically made, wonderfully directed, wonderfully shot, wonderfully acted. It's almost a perfect film.